My name is Casey Barrett. I am thrilled to be joined today by Peter Swanson, world-class suspense novelist whose latest book, his seventh novel, I'll hold it up for you right here, Every Vow You Break, comes out tomorrow. It's fantastic. My own review is going up tomorrow on Booktrib. They're consistently, I think I mentioned in my review, their books are consistently fantastic. And Eight Perfect Murders, which many of you may be aware of, came out just before the world turned upside down. The hardcover came out March 3rd, 2020. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, March 3rd.
So yeah, things went sideways soon after Eight Perfect Murders came out.
I feel like my book launch party was basically like the last party that took place in the country. I mean, I'm sure it's not, but felt like I had this big gathering of friends and we were starting to talk about it. So there are little jokes like, let's touch elbows instead of touch hands, but we're all laughing. We're all like, haha, this is silly. Is this, and now like I talk about it with my friends, they're like, oh yeah, that was the last night I went out, because afterwards we all went out for drinks. And then I remember, and then I took one last trip. I went to Houston. There's a great mystery bookstore in Houston, Murder by the Book. And I flew there probably when I shouldn't have, like right around the time when everything was really crashing down. I remember it as a specific date. I think most people remember it. It's the day the NBA canceled their games and the day that we found out Tom Hanks had COVID.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, those two things, everyone's like, oh, this is actually serious.
You were flying at the very, very tail end then. Because I remember. Yeah. I mean, I remember my wife took a flight, I think it was like March 9th, and that was before the Hanks news came out. And that was very, very iffy. Getting back, it felt like, that was the final, like the curtain came down for our family, like right when she got back. And it was like, oh my God, you were at LAX and then JFK, like when you shouldn't have been.
So you're saying, yeah, basically I was flying after the curtain came. Like I definitely went.
You were really pushing it.
Yeah, I was really pushing it. And, but basically I snuck in all my book events, not all of them, but most of them. And now, it's a year later and we're all virtual. So still virtual.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm guessing you're not, are you going to be going out to be able to do some live events for Every Vow You Break or not yet? No.
Nothing's planned. Nope. I mean, nothing live. Everything's virtual, which is fine. I mean, I think it's the right choice. I'm fine with it. And, I think these virtual events are kind of good because in a weird way, I get to invite people. I'm doing my book launch event tomorrow night with Paul Tremblay, and I get to invite friends from California, to show up and watch it at least, as opposed to, when it was just a live thing, geography played a part. So that part's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obviously more fun to see someone live and in person, and especially to have a little party afterwards or whatever. But it's what it is. So I think it's looking right now like, if I have a book come out next year, it will be different. We'll be back to something resembling normality.
I wanted to ask you, that reminds me of I think everyone's roughly familiar that the lead times in publishing are just notoriously glacial. So at this point last year when Eight Perfect Murders had just come out, were you already, what point were you at with Every Vow You Break? Were you well into?
I mean, it was written. It was
already
completely written. And I don't think it had gone through editing yet. Not for my editors anyway. It had gone through my agent kind of edits it for me as well. But yeah, no, I mean, it was pretty much in the can, close to in the can, which is always funny because whenever I'm talking about a book, the book that I've been thinking about for a year is a different book.
Yeah.
That's the way it goes.
Yeah. And so I'm figuring you already are in a totally different headspace now working on.
Yeah, because I've got my next book. Yeah. My COVID set thriller. No, it's actually not. Yeah, I haven't done one of those yet. But no, my next book is what I've just finished. which is not this book. Book was a year ago.
Yeah.
But this is the book we're here to talk about.
Yeah, it is hard to get your head around.
Yeah.
Trying to go back and remember what you were thinking.
Yeah, remember.
When you were putting it together. And then, so you've been on the one a year pace for a couple of years now.
Yeah, I remember my, I think my UK editor, when I turned in my first book, like right away, I turned in my second. And my UK editor goes, "Oh, you can write a book in a year?" He goes, you know, now that you've let us know that, like, we'll put you on a one a year schedule. And I was like, I can do that. I mean, it's a little, I don't find the writing punishing. I can write a book in a year. That's not hard. I think going through the whole process of all the stuff that a book entails, that going through the edits, going through the copy edits, struggling with the editors over what to call the book, talking with marketing, all that other stuff, doing that once a year can be, a minor strain, or just something that I don't love to do.
Right.
But in terms of actually coming up with a story and writing it in a year feels natural to me.
Yeah, that pace, I mean, and especially if you break it down into word counts, or being consistent every day, that always feels reasonable. But I've heard now, from a bunch of different folks, deeper in their career and older writers, that the first one that came to mind is Ian Rankin. It was one of the thrills of my life, because I've been a fan of his for so long, but got to talk to him for a while a couple of years ago, and he said, a book a year is fine, but the champagne problem of being more successful is that you don't really have a year to do the book, because for 7 months of that year, they're sending you out doing different events and doing,
right.
I mean, that's a wonderful problem. I mean, we'll all be so lucky as writers to have that problem, but he said, really a year.
It's not a year of writing.
Yeah.
It never is. And even now, thinking of getting started on my next book, but the next thing that will probably happen is I'm going to hear back from my editors about all the changes, in the book that I just turned in. And I'm a one at a time. I can't do both. I can't really edit and be working on my next book.
Yeah.
I'm always working on my next book sort of in my head. I'm definitely like a daydream writer. Like, I'm dreaming up, thinking in advance of what I want to write. But once I start writing that, I can't really be working on two things at once.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Through the pandemic, and I've heard also the gamut of different responses about from writers. Like, were you able to stay consistent and productive, or were there times where it was just feeling like it was crippling to be?
Yeah, it's funny. What happened to me was, I think I had the two swings. At first, I was really productive for whatever reason. That for those next 3 months, like, I was like, yeah, this is fine. I mean, I'm just doing what I always do, which is I'm hunkering down. It's winter, and I got great writing done. And then I heard all these other writers say, I couldn't concentrate or whatever, and I was like, eh. And then sometime around summer into fall, I just lost all my concentration. I think what happened, which I think a lot of people will be familiar with, and it's a problem, it's a modern problem we all have, which is, doom scrolling, or whatever you want to call it, just reading the news constantly, like constantly checking every hour what's happening politically, what's happening with COVID, what's happening in the world. There's so much stuff going on, and really finding it hard to settle into either reading or writing. And just getting to the point where, like, my turn off mechanism became Netflix thrillers or whatever, like everyone else. Not that there's anything wrong with binging Netflix thrillers, thank God for it.
Yeah.
But I lost a little concentration on the books. No one needs to know the news every hour unless you're President Biden or something. I mean, we just don't need to, unless there's massive breaking news. Getting the news once a day would be great, like people used to do. But we don't live in that world anymore. We live in this very distracted world. So what I eventually did was I just went to those extremes of saying, I'm putting away my phone, I'm setting aside this time. and I'm forcing myself to read and write, and kind of got back into it. But there was a point there where I did lose my concentration.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny you say late summer and fall. Very, very similar, I think, pattern happened with me where I felt like April, May, maybe into June. I just felt like, yes, everything's falling down around us, but like this is my sanity point where I can just like
Yeah.
sit down and write. And it's like the wheels came off in the fall. Like I couldn't. I'm like mostly a morning writer, and I couldn't get up and resist scrolling through all the New York Times before. And that kills your morning right away.
It's over. Yeah.
I mean,
Also,
you can't sit down and get in your headspace after you've just read the Times and making coffee. It's just over.
Yeah. So you have to come up with, you have to rethink what your day's like, and you have to learn to select when you look at news. And that's really hard because the news is constantly like poking at you, it's buzzing at you literally in your pocket. Like,
yeah,
it's weird. It's weird times. Yeah.
It's so before, as we mentioned before we hopped on it live, before we talked about your new one, I wanted to go back and just chat for a few minutes on about 8 Perfect Murders. In one sense, it feels like, a lifetime ago this came out. In another sense, it was like, it doesn't, I don't know. Time is a construct.
Time is wobbly.
Yeah, it doesn't quite make sense. But so you and I met, weirdly, it seems longer ago, but it was about 1.5 years ago in Dallas at VoucherCon, which I say is for people who don't know, it's the World Mystery Conference. For people that do, and the way my wife likes to make fun of me for it, it's like your Comic-Con and you and all your friends can go geek out and get drunk together,
right?
Which is closer to the point. But I remember, it's no false praise whatsoever, but this was one of like the buzzing about books in Dallas that year at VoucherCon. And I distinctly remember the night that we had dinner with like 8 of us, right? 7 or 8 of us.
Yeah.
And that day I had just grabbed this. One of the beauties of that conference is the books that are about to come out or have just come out, publishers, the ones they're excited about, you get to pick, what is it? Sometimes like 4 or 5 with your tickets.
Yeah.
You get free.
You get free books. Right?
Yeah, you get free books, which is really not what I don't need a bigger stack to get to, but this one I'd already finished the first 3 chapters. I was stoked about it, and in the lobby of the hotel, I'd met a writer friend of mine, Angie Kim, who saw it, and she had it, and we were like excited, and we were both saying we were about to start it. And a librarian who Angie knew came up to us, seeing your book also, and her exact words I remember is, "You have no idea. This is the kind of book that librarians and book clubs live for." And it was like, and it was a really like, it was a telling thing because both of us kind of like, oh, well, our books aren't clearly, but it was very, very cool because, and it makes sense because 8 Perfect Murders is a love letter to the classics of mystery fiction. So I understood where that was coming from. But I just thought it was very cool. And I remember probably embarrassing when you walked into dinner and geeking out a little bit and standing up being like, I'm already 3 chapters in.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was, back in those crazy heady days, I think we probably even shook hands or something.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. I think
shared an appetizer
at the end of the night.
Yeah, crazy. Yeah, probably. I do. Yeah, I remember that. No, obviously it was pretty cool to meet a fellow writer who's just started your book. So that was great.
Yeah, and it's, I remember when I wrote the review on it, it was, everybody has this guilt in a way of the books we haven't read, and when I turned over this, I immediately, like, 4 of them are like touchstones, and then the other 4 I was embarrassed not to have read, and not necessarily ones that, I feel like everyone at this point, like Double Indemnity, Stranger on a Train, Secret History, to me, like, those are a given. The one that like thrilled me that you included was The Drowner, because not just because I love John Dee, but that book actually, and we both love mysterious books. We've talked about Mysterious Bookshop in New York City, but I actually had them track down a pocketbook paperback first edition of The Drowner way
Oh
back,
wow.
because I love like the cover. It almost like predates a Jaws cover. You remember
Is
the
it the girl being pulled down through the water?
Yes.
That's
Yes.
an unbelievable image. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's an incredible book, but the fact that you included that one, I mean, there's a million John Dees you could put in there.
Yeah.
But The Drowner, it was just like I was like throwing pumpers to myself. But then I was like, well, how have I not read the Death Trap? Or I wasn't even familiar with the play Death Trap. So
Oh
like,
really?
no, it made me go back and
Cool.
do some homework too, which is good.
Cool. Good. The good kind of homework.
The good kind of homework, yeah, yeah. But it was, and I noticed like this time, I don't know if it was intentional or maybe really like sprinkling references of like your own favorite stuff through your books, but you dropped some great movie references in this latest one, namely Vertigo and Wicker Man, which are two like.
Yeah. I think I mean I love to do that anyway. I love when characters reference the books and movies that they like. I hate reading a book when someone's like, the character's like, yeah, we went home and watched a movie, and they don't tell you what movie it is. I'm kind of like, well, that's, we need to know what movie. So I like to put those things in. It's also a way of, it's like I often reference what I think I'm ripping off. So I feel like, wow, I'm hewing a little close to the Wicker Man here in my plot line. So why don't I mention the Wicker Man so no one's like, he ripped off the Wicker Man. They'll be like, oh, that's an homage.
Yeah.
Because there's a fine line between ripping something off and creating an homage to it. So I like to try and make it look like I'm on the homage side.
Well, if you
Much
call out
classier.
yourself, you beat everybody to it.
Exactly.
That's
You always got to do that. So yeah, but I do like to sprinkle in references, and I think in this one, Abigail, the in Every Vow You Break, the main character is Abigail Baskin, and she's a horror movie fan, and so she has those references, and she winds up in she's not sure at first. She thinks she's in sort of odd. She's being stalked, and but other weird things are happening, and she's like, because she has movie references, she's like, this feels like such and such, and it's a way to sort of build up what it feels like to be her, because she has these movie point references.
Yeah, and she grew up around the theater, and her father was. I mean, that was I mean, I don't think it's giving away anything to say that the father-daughter relationship was this key thread that I really like. I mean, that kind of anchored her in my mind, that she was a kind of a daddy's girl who and her parents owned this the Box Grove Theater, and he was forever trying to put on the perfect play. And it was a cool way to be able to go back and get references where she would have picked up in a natural way, because her father was a theater and movie lover so much.
And they have a game they play called What Movie Are We In, where like if they're in a strange situation, they'll say, what movie are we in, and they'll try and figure out like what this reminds them of, or whatever. So I'm glad you picked up on that, the parent relationship, because writing Abigail, and she's what I would call an every woman character, or very much an I often write characters. I think Mal in A Perfect Murders is more has darkness in him, and he's in this gray area. Abigail's kind of just an ordinary 20-year-old who gets thrust into a really dangerous, strange situation. And it's hard as a writer to write ordinary people who are basically content with their lives. Like it's, to not give them, traumas in the past, to just create this person. And it took me a while to build her character. And what finally cracked it for me was the relationship she had with her parents. She was an only child, and both her parents, who are in the midst of a separation, are actually both loving parents that she has a good relationship with. But I think that became, the more I thought about the dangerous situation she was in, she thinks about her parents and seeing them again. And it really became like, how I built her character, because I was having a tough time. I'm so used to dark and damaged characters. But most, it's hard to write ordinariness,
Yeah.
and and figuring out that how important her parents were to her was sort of the key to unlocking her for me. So it's cool that you notice that.
Good. I mean, it's, yeah, like I said, I thought it was a thread that really, it anchored her as a character. And she's an ordinary character, so to speak, but like, she's by no means an unflawed character. Like the hook is that she
Yeah,
cheats
right,
on, she
right,
cheats
right,
on
right.
her bachelorette. Like, and then that's another thing I think, protagonists in general, like, I don't want to see a perfect protagonist. I don't like,
Right.
I just don't want the good guy or the perfect girl to drive a story. Like, it needs some flaws, whether it's in diction or whatever it is. So but you do, like, I think, place yourself at quite a challenge if the person we're all supposed to be rooting for um, just had sex with a guy right before she's supposed to get married. You know,
Yeah, I was thinking. I mean, the first half of the book, at least, is certainly an infidelity thriller, and the sort of similar to like a Fatal Attraction. Um, yeah, she makes a mistake on her bachelorette weekend. She gets drunk, winds up hanging out with a pretty interesting guy, and rationalizes her way into a one night fling that she feels very bad about afterwards. But like a lot of mistakes, she decides, I'm just going to forget this one and leave it in the past and move forward. And then the mistake follows her, literally. And so it starts with this sort of, I did think about that, and I was like, um, I didn't try and over rationalize it because I didn't want to like try and build. Yeah, maybe what she's doing isn't great, and maybe it should make her think about her upcoming marriage, which she should be thinking about. I mean, there's a lot going on there
mhm,
with why she chooses to do what she does. But I also think most people can relate to the idea of screwing up.
mhm.
And hoping to kind of get away with it, or forget it, or leave it in the past. So that's sort of where she's at.
Yeah, I did like. I'd never heard it, but I like that line of the fling before the ring. That's
It's sort of funny. One last fling before the ring. Yeah, someone turned it into a little rhyming couplet.
yeah.
I hadn't heard of it till I think I started writing this book, and my working title on this book was Before the Ring
Okay.
for a long time. So
Well, I mean, you just mentioned second. Speaking of movie references, a Fatal Attraction type thing, and I remember I think you referred to like that 80s genre as like these cheesy infidelity movies, and I remember circling when I was reading it because I was like, those were like my favorite movies, like those basically like Michael Douglas vehicles of like powerful man losing control. Like,
yeah,
those I would go back to like a million times. Particularly Fatal Attraction or Sleeping with the Enemy, the Diane Lane movie Unfaithful.
yeah,
I thought I love those movies. I wish they'd still made them.
I do too.
Um,
I do. I mean, I'm certainly not denigrating that by calling it cheesy. I wish they still made them too. I think of them as sort of these. It, every way you describe them sounds bad, like a middlebrow thriller, but like but boy, like, yeah, they should make more of those movies. They're really fun movies, and when they're
yeah,
done well, as those movies that you just mentioned are, like, they're really they're great to watch. And now I watch them, or if I go back and watch one, um they look almost classic. I
yeah,
mean, they're, the way they're filmed, and especially if Adrian Lynn was behind the camera on them, he's um a master at sort of framing, and the way that New York looks in Fatal Attraction. I mean, it's just sort of, it's
oh
of a
yeah,
different era. It's kind
yeah,
of great. And you're right, it is. It's for most of those stories, it's about a powerful man brought down,
yeah,
um, which is always an interesting thing, and that's a different scenario. So this story is a little bit of a reverse, because there is a powerful man that she's marrying, but she's the one who's cheated on him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, speaking of powerful men, I found it like, I don't know if this was intentional at all, but I found a through line or theme, or I'm not even sure if when you're, if you have a set theme or a thesis in your head while you're writing, but I kept going back to like the fragile male ego. Like that just seemed like there were so many beats of like the fragile male ego and how's it going to come back to haunt. Was that an intentional,
Oh
theme?
yeah. Well, my touchstone for the whole book is a quote by Margaret Atwood, and I mention it in the acknowledgements, which you
Yeah,
probably
but you
didn't
don't
have
say
in
the
book.
quote. You just say in your parenthetical, you say, you
I
don't
know.
ever deliver the quote.
There's a reason for that. It's because it's a slightly odd quote, because so Margaret Atwood is quoted as saying, and it's brilliant, men are afraid that women will laugh at them. Women are afraid that men will kill them.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of, to me, that was like what I kept coming back to in the book. So not obviously the fear of death from the woman's perspective, but also men and their fragile egos. Like what if they're laughed at? What if they're rejected sexually? What if, and how much is built into like masculinity can be such a fragile thing. What if this book is obviously taking it to some extremes, which is what books often do. One of the reasons I did so Margaret Atwood did say that. She said it in a Q&A period of a talk I think she gave, and she didn't say it directly like that. She said it in a long sort of paragraph, and she's been, so I just was like, I don't know if it's a direct quote, and I'm not going to use it, and maybe it's too on the nose anyway, and so I just mention it at that end of the book, in the acknowledgments, and figure people will then, it'll pique their interest. But yes, I often went back to that one line just to sort of think about my characters.
Yeah. I mean, I found at various points thinking about both like, the incel trend, which to me is one of those terrifying of any kind of domestic terrorism, is these incel folks. But also the fact that, I mean, and this isn't meant to be a derogatory thing towards all of Silicon Valley, but there is this sense a lot of times of, the nerds inheriting the earth and, and becoming these titans. And these are the same guys that were laughed at, speaking of afraid of being laughed at, they were laughed at until they got very, very rich in many cases. And again, that's a blanket statement, and it's not necessarily true for all of the tech world, but it's, there's an awful lot of them to notice a trend there, and can lead to some very bad behavior.
A little bit into incel culture as some research into this book, and a little bit into men's rights groups that have been around for a while. And I didn't get too specific. I mean, I pepper in like some references to some of that stuff. I didn't want to be specifically about any one group. But yeah, I mean, it's out there, and there is you're right. There's a sort of tech money connection as well. And then you hear about some of these sort of, young tech guys suddenly have, hundreds of millions of dollars, and they're throwing parties where they get to be like the frat parties they didn't get invited to on these high end, scary levels. So there's stuff going on.
I mean, it's hard not to think a pathology is going to emerge from some of those minds.
Yeah, exactly. So I think my book is sort of a tip of the iceberg of some of that stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, tell me a little bit more about those men's groups. I'm like vaguely familiar with them. Are they like fidelity obsessed, or like, it seems like especially right now in today's culture, for any, like, not assuming they're all white males, but like for white males to get together and feel oppressed feels supremely ironic at this point in time.
And it's funny because I first heard about them. I was a bookseller when I graduated from college just a long time ago, early 90s. And one of the popular books that came out at that time that we were selling was called Iron John. And it was an early men's rights groups about basically how men had lost the ability to express their masculinity. Again, it's male victimhood, white male victimhood, that we're no longer allowed to do this. And in the book, what it recommended was men sort of going back into the forest and being in drum circles and stuff like that. And we got some laughs out of that. But and I think actually the guy who wrote that book, the poet, now I forget his name. I mean, I think there were some interesting ideas going on in that, and like, but there was at its heart like a victimhood. I felt that it seemed like there was a victimhood at its heart, which seemed problematic. I mean, a drum circle in the woods is not from. I mean, I wouldn't want to be in there. And maybe it's good for some people, but that was sort of a thought too. So I threw in these type of men, and then a lot of it has to do with I think a lot of the men's rights groups that aren't like incel have to do with victimhood around parenting, around custody. And also feeling that like women now run the show, and that that women get all again, they're not looking at the facts really. Yeah, that women are taking over and taking charge, and that men are now a minority culture. But some of that is also around custody battles, I think, in divorce cases.
Yeah. Well, it's could say it's been a good multi-thousand-year run that is now
right. yeah no, that's true. Yeah, up until so we'll give them the next 1,000 years. Yeah.
So I'm very curious. You don't have to mid work. I know I certainly don't want to like talking about it mid work, but I'm curious what direction you're going next with future books, or you have some lined up that you're excited to talk about.
I'm not quite at the talking stages, but my next book coming out is sort of something I've been thinking about for a long time, which is a modern take on And Then There Were None, the Agatha Christie novel where 10 strangers are invited to an island. So I was thinking about, what's a modern island, and what's a place where people can't escape from. So I came up with a sort of a weird take on that, that at one point I'll say more about, but that's where I'm at. And it's a book I really enjoyed writing. And it has nothing to do with the pandemic, but weirdly it's imbued, I think, with a kind of the dread we all feel about the pandemic.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's happened randomly, coincidentally, who knows?
Well, I think the need, the forced isolation has produced this like sense in so many of us, not just of dread, but like, where can I escape to, or where can I get to that's normal or safe or separate from all this. So it's I'm really curious, just in general, the kind of books that I hope people don't start cranking out pandemic novels, because I think a lot of time needs to pass before any of us can digest all the trauma that we're all going through. But it's bound to influence fiction. How can it not? A ton.
Well, we'll see. I mean, the Spanish flu did not, and that's sort of famously people have said there's just no movies, books written about the Spanish flu. I mean, so we'll see if people just move on. But the other thing is, it's hard to ignore as a contemporary novelist, like you are as well. Where are you going to set your books? Are you going to continue to have people meet and shake hands and do all those things?
Yeah.
Are you going to have bar scene? I mean, are you going to acknowledge this in your book? So I think all contemporary novelists have to figure out, are we going to keep setting our books in 2015 and just, are we going to ignore it? Are we going to mention it briefly in passing?
Well, if you're writing a contemporary novel right now, as you are, as I am, it's almost like you have to put yourself slightly in the future in some hopeful way, that you can have bar and restaurant scenes that you can have interactions in some way.
Yeah.
I don't know. Or you can just go straight to historical fiction. But
Right.
I mean, it makes things very, very complicated. I don't know if did you read Carl Hysen's latest that came out at the end of the summer?
No.
It's called Squeeze Me. I mean, I'm generally not a fan of like the comic mystery, but I just think he's so clever. Like, he's
very good at it.
He's real good. But reading as a writer, you can tell that like he was inserting stuff at the 11th hour about the pandemic because
he was. Okay.
Well, there's references of like they finally got to have it's set in Palm Beach. It's like this was their first social season where they could actually congregate again. And
okay.
And it's kind of suspending because the president or the former president, thankfully, and first lady remain unnamed, but very obviously like a plot point.
Yeah.
But I'd be fascinated to hear he and his editor talk about how they scrambled, because there couldn't have been anywhere around it. It came out like the first Tuesday in September.
Yeah,
and,
it's crazy.
They have to address it somehow. But I don't know.
Or not. Yeah, I don't know. Everyone's going to make a different choice, but and some people will take a shot at a full-on pandemic thriller. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like just and someone will probably write a great one too.
Yeah.
I think
I don't know if you've read Station 11, Emily St. James.
Yeah, I love that book.
Oh my God. I'm actually in awe of all 5 of her books. I think Glass Hotel might be even better, but
I can't believe I haven't read that yet. So I'm going to read that next, but yeah, I love Station.
You have to. Yeah. And I mean, Station, I'm excited, and I don't usually love when, something I revere becomes a series, but Station 11, I'm very curious. I think it's gonna be HBO Max. Is that right? Something. Anyway, it's in development to be a series.
We should mention the author's name. Emily, is it St. John Mandel?
Emily St. John Mandel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think and that's actually a good example of how, book release parties and book tours have opened up in a way. Like I was up in the Catskills and went to Books Are Magic in Brooklyn and got to see her do a great book event down in Brooklyn. And that's it's you need some FaceTime, and I miss that, but I've certainly gone to like more book events that there's nothing going on in the Catskills. There's no bookstores nearby me that I'm going to go to a book release party. But I went to the Glass Hotel book release party that was down in Brooklyn. Yeah. So
you didn't have to leave your living room.
No.
And the drinks were free.
Didn't have to be shy about raising my hand for a question. You just type it in.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So it's been awesome talking to you. It's
great. Nice seeing you again, Casey.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully we can have a proper drink when we can socialize in person sometime soon.
Someday soon, yeah. Hopefully.
Yeah. All right. Sending you all my best. Keep cranking these out. I love them.
All right. Thank you, Casey. This has been fun.
Thank you. All right.
Bye.
Talk to you soon.